Sim for kicking this program off in grand style. My name is Dr. Osi Potokri once more. I would formally want to welcome you all to this very unique conference, the National Education Leadership Conference, to be precise. It's been partnered by Kagiso Trust Fund, Nect, and UJ. Okay, so in the interest of time, I am going to welcome the personality, eminent personality, people who are regarded as food soldiers when it comes to talking to us with regards to the theme for today. The theme for today is actually leading schools during challenging times, the impact of COVID-19 in catalyzing a fourth industrial revolution-driven culture of learning. As you are also aware, COVID-19 has taken so much from us and has also given so much to us, whatever we want to look at it. However, it has reconfigured our lifestyle, our workplaces, and so many other things that one couldn't have imagined before now. It all started with many of us not knowing about it. And at the point it became a panic, and it migrated to crisis before it was eventually declared as a pandemic. And here we sit as scholars, as stakeholders who are very concerned about the future, particularly within the domain of the fourth industrial revolution. So we had to problematize the issue before us to say, okay, what is the way forward as to how to address and to unravel the very challenge before us. In the light of this, we had to come up with some kind of sub-themes that speaks to the future. And these sub-themes have been correctly, in my view, aligned with some pertinent questions. And some of these questions, precisely two of these questions, are going to be the focus and, of course, the intention of the conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, professors, doctors in the arts, every other scholar within the academia and beyond, it is my pleasure to introduce or talk about, rather tell you that the two pertinent questions that we will be talking about are: one, what kind of school leadership is needed during challenging times? During challenging times. Of course, we know we are in COVID-19 era. For now, it is indeed challenging. The second question will be, what are some of the key imperatives highlighted by the pandemic, which we should hold on to as we build back better? So these two pertinent questions, I will want to say justice will be done to them by some of our, if not all of our speakers. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you once again. And in doing so, I will want the Chief Executive Officer of Kagiso Trust, Ms. Hedon, and the Chief Executive Officer of Nect, Mr. Godwin. So thank you very much for coming on board to talk to us from your wealth of experience. Thank you. So the first speaker will be the Chief Executive Officer of Kagiso Trust. My pleasure to introduce Ms. Hedon. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Collins. Let me just go straight to welcoming everyone to this afternoon session. You know, COVID has kept us away from each other for almost 2 years now. And I think for the education community and schools, we have really faced a great deal of obstacles. And it is heartening that today so many people can gather around to say we need to continue talking, we need to continue sharing, because this is one of the most important sectors in our country and where it's taking our young people to. So ladies and gentlemen, before I continue, I'd like to take this opportunity really to say to all the stakeholders, thank you for embracing the new normal, not allowing the changes to paralyze us. Thank you for allowing collaborations and efforts like the ones that we have today to continue to ensure that our education system remains on track. I also want to just say to all of us here that, you know, this is the first principal conference, leadership conference that we are hosting. And I want to welcome all of you. I want to really make special thanks to the CEO of NECT, Gordon Koza. I also want to thank Soraya Neka, the head of education, leadership and management in UJ, and yourself, Dr. Collins, for really working hard to make sure that this becomes possible. I want to welcome and thank our panelists today. Thank you for lending us your time. We can only learn from, as Dr. Collins said, for people who are on the ground, and these learnings be shared broadly. And I think if we do that, we will emerge as a country in a better space. Thank you for everyone who has been involved really to put in this conference together. I can really not thank you enough. This conference is really a culmination of the school culture intervention that is within NECT in their innovation unit. And we are pleased to have such initiatives that assist to say, how do we use COVID-19 as a catalyst for change in education? How do we reimagine ourselves? How do we reimagine how we will reemerge and use this crisis to our advantage? As Kagiso Trust, we believe in such partnerships and collaborations as the one that we have today with NECT and our partners UJ. It has really been a partnership journey that has been nurtured over the years with UJ, and we really appreciate it. We believe these partnerships are there to transform society, to achieve prosperity, to achieve equity, and to achieve justice. We hope that today's discussions will continue even after tomorrow as we finish the conference. We'll be finishing the conference tomorrow. We really need to look at this pandemic that was unforeseen by schools, that has caused interruptions, as a place and opportunity to learn and for mutual learning. Let's break down the boundaries and extend the horizons to orientate our school's culture. We are acknowledging in this conference that principles are key, leadership is key, and would like collaboratively to engage and say, how do we talk about this in a way that will embrace where we are and the opportunities that we have? Dr. Collins has mentioned already about fourth industrial revolution. We are pleased that UJ has really been positioned as a serious thought leader around fourth industrial revolution. And we believe these opportunities should not be underplayed. So ladies and gentlemen, it is time to share good practices, to share models, and there are many for school leadership in these trying times. It is time to share our knowledge. It is time to share our thoughts on how we can move forward. It is time to map out the visions of how we want to see schools and areas of learning be rebuilt effectively. My dream, my personal wish is that every child that goes through our schooling system at all levels, not just at grade 12s, right at the beginning, should achieve the highest level of competencies. And I think with the deliberations we're going to have here today, we've got the right people to help us to do so. I thank you. Over to you, Dr. Collins.
Thank you very much for that wonderful insight, so to speak. You have just greased, you have also powered, and the wheel is set for motion now. Just to add to your voice, it would be my honor to welcome Mr. Godwin, the Chief Executive Officer of NECT. Mr. Godwin, is he in? If you are in, please, you've got the floor to talk to us from your perception. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Dr. Collins. And thank you to my colleague, Memoitse, the CEO of Kagiso Trust, and everyone else who has joined us this afternoon. So I first want to just recognize our appreciation of the collaboration that we have with a Kagiso Trust on a number of fronts, as well as the University of Johannesburg, which we work very closely with as the NECT, and of course UJ and Kagiso Trust as the two of the many other organizations that work in the education sector and very committed to helping improve the quality of education in this country. We really appreciate the collaboration. The second, of course, is to recognize the school leaders that are part of this conversation. School leaders are very important. I always compare the education network with the network of service points for the other social services in the public space. We have more schools than clinics. We have more schools than prisons. We've got more schools than local government, and all these schools, all these delivery points actually are managed by the people who are represented here today on this conversation, And I really want to, acknowledge the importance of this stratum of our society. You do a very important, work of receiving and seeing through to the development of the 13 million kids who are in your institutions in any given year. So, Chairperson, the topic, of today clearly has no master. Certainly in the borders of our country, when COVID-19 hit the country last year, we hadn't experienced anything close to what we've seen. Other countries, fortunately or unfortunately have seen that, whether it's hurricanes that hit their countries or floods. We've never seen that in South Africa. So I'm going to talk practically from my experience of last year, because it was the first time that I too was involved in managing such a crisis situation of that magnitude. But I think there are indeed lessons that we can pick, from those experiences, and some suggestions on what a school managers can do going forward. The first time that the public service and the private sector actually have been hit by the same challenge, and both sectors did not have any prior experiences of dealing with the crisis. So we kind of learned from each other, and I think institutions such as schools would also draw lessons from systemic levels of the system. So that's where I'm going to reflect from. My reflection of this pandemic was a complete and utter shock, shown by the system, and you would expect that from any system. And I think it was the correct thing to do to, halt movements and interactions until we understood what was going on. The second observation that I've made in the first half of the year was a complete test of the resilience of the system at every level of the system, from the schools, around the schools, above the schools, whether it's circuit offices, district offices, provincial offices, and the national, system. I think, however, as a country, we fared much better in the resilience test. I've seen the system pull itself together in a very short space of time, which act hadn't, happened, could have spelled out a huge disaster for our system. So you remember that our education system by around July was starting to bring back, the learners amidst all sorts of confusion that was in the system. I think that we have fared, fairly well. In other countries, there are organizations that have been set up for this kind of, responses. Not here, but the closest in my reflection of such organizations that work in this crisis situation is the likes of the Gift of the Givers. And these are organizations that are flexible in their structures and in their processes, and they're able to quickly reorganize and take different shapes in order to get in and deliver on needs that are emergent. So they're typically agile, and I don't think that kind of agility was shown in our system, particularly at the school level system. However, I think 1 year down the line, systems have been put in place to manage those kind of situations. I just would like to say that there is actually literature on how to deal with disaster situations, and it's literature that on our shores we've actually never found it necessary, to delve into, and perhaps it is time that even the universities, start exploring, including that kind of literature in the preparation of school managers. I did not know that there's such a thing called the Hedon matrix of disaster management. It's a very simple, a matrix. It helps institutions to deal with disasters in a structured manner. I would recommend that people start, looking at that kind of literature to prepare for any emergence of such disasters, as well as to deal with the post-disaster situation. So at the school level, where the school managers are responsible for managing the post-disaster effects, and I think we must be honest, because we haven't gone through the disaster. It's unlike Catherine, what is it, Hurricane Catherine or whatever it is, that comes and goes and you deal with the disaster afterwards. Even at this point, we're not yet sure whether we're out of the woods yet, even with the increasing levels of vaccination. So that kind of defines the challenge that the school managers are facing and the uncertainties that still surrounds the management of the schools. But in the midst of all these happenings, I find it important to focus on the important stuff. There's many things that have happened in schools. There's many things that have to be put back in place, at the center of which I think is curriculum recovery. But curriculum recovery would happen if we have a clear sense of what is important to focus on and to recover. And for us to identify that clear focus areas, I think it is important to look at what we've actually lost. The big thing that we've lost during the pandemic is time. So we've completely lost learning and teaching time, and there's all sorts of research that has been carried out that indicate that we've lost up to 70% of the teaching time in the past year and a half. And that learners could have learned as little as 30% of what they are supposed to learn. And when we talk about the 30%, the truth is that 30% is actually an average. So there are instances where learners have not learned much. A good indication of how much we have lost is provided by part of the research that the NECT has carried out in December last year and sometimes back this year, which actually identifies a very low levels of writing in learner books. And that was used as a proxy of how much we think learning and teaching has happened. So just to give you an example, I mean, out of the trimmed curriculum and the expected exercises, in about 6 months, grade 3s and grade 9s had written anything between 9 and about 17 exercises in 6 months. So that's too low. And perhaps first and foremost, we're not concerned about just the level of writing, which is, of course, we have to focus on, but what that stands for, what that indicates. It indicates very little interface, and it suggests that actually there would have been very little learning and teaching happening. So, of course, at the secondary level, we must be concerned about how much our learners have written, and as educationists, we should know that learners are able to actualize what they learn if they write, if they concretize it into writing. So the third loss is it's the loss of the opportunity. And there's huge literature that starts to point that actually, even though we can recover the time, we aren't able to recover the opportunity. So in a sense, we will not be able to teach a 7-year-old girl the content that they were supposed to have been taught in that particular year. So that calls for for managers and teachers to pay good attention on how they actually bridge the gap in terms of the opportunity that has been lost in teaching these young people. But there are some lessons and observations that we've made which are useful. And some of the observations are that actually going forward, we will be dealing with 3 categories of schools in one education system. So there are schools that did not go on rotation system. And that means that those schools actually are a bit ahead with the trimmed curriculum, or they may even be teaching the full curriculum because they would have had more time. The second category is the category of schools, and particularly primary schools, that have come back, brought back their learners in full. So those categories of schools would have gone on rotation before, and would mean that they've lost a lot of time, and catch up for them would mean a different story altogether. And then there's a third category, which we believe that government is still dealing with solutions to the required resourcing to bring them back to school. The schools that are still on rotation. So a recent survey that we've carried out involving about 114 randomly sampled schools from across the country, showed that 23% of the schools that were part of that sample actually still continue to on a rotational basis. So that means that these schools will still, teach much less than what is expected of a typical primary school. So the challenge continues, and all those challenges have to be dealt with, by the principals. But I think what we can learn from that or conclude is that we can't continue to at school level teach, the same to different categories of schools. So we have to start thinking of differentiated, approaches to addressing, education recovery. And just to end with some suggestions, we think that the most important thing is to establish functionality and to rebuild energy levels. All of us have been impacted by COVID in one way or another, and it's up to managers to lead from the front and to identify strategies for rebuilding focus, energy, and to increase the operations in schools, thereby dealing with issues of functionality. If we did that, attendance and dropout rates could be addressed in that manner. Secondly, I couldn't emphasize more the need to focus on getting our learners to write more. So let them write a little more in school, let them write a little more at home, let them write a little more in the afternoon, classrooms. And I think the big suggestion I would make is actually not to take the eye away from the long-term goals and only focus on the short-term goals. So the role of the managers in each of the schools will still have to be to strike a balance between the short-term imperatives as well as the longer-term goal of improving the quality of education, which process we've been involved with before COVID. Lastly, and not least, is that we have to put people at the center of the recovery agenda. So the wellness of teachers, the wellness of learners, and the kind of partnership that we need to enforce between the learners, the teachers, and the home in order to close the wellness, psychosocial, gap that has been created by COVID-19. There are a whole lot of institutions around the schools that have to be tapped into to help close that gap. Churches, mosques, and NGOs that exist around the schools need to be tapped into to support both learners, the staff, and the learners in closing the psychosocial needs in schools. And very last, it will be important for each and every school and each and every school manager to take all these lessons and to categorize them into short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies, so that our response to COVID-19 are actually structured and we don't put more focus only on the short term and ignore the long term. I would like to wish the conference well, and I hope that the little input would contribute to the conversation that the heads of schools will take up this afternoon. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, our CEO, Mr. Godwin. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your contribution so far. I'm just seated there listening to you, just like I listened to the CEO of Kagiso Trust. I can tell the energies, I can tell the resources that you guys are equipped with. Although it's very unfortunate that time did not permit you, both of you, to accelerate or to give to us much that you have. But not to worry, I'm sure somewhere in between the program, you will find time to do so. Thank you once more. We're moving straight to the next item on the agenda, and that requires me to further talk about the focus and the intention of the conference, and as well outline the program. So to do so, I will summarize in the interest of time that the program, as you already know, we are talking about leading schools during challenging times, the impact of COVID-19 in catalyzing the fourth industrial revolution driven culture of learning. Be that as it may, I had said before now that there are two key questions that we will be trying to unravel. However, it will make sense for me to talk about the objectives and the sub-themes of this conference. The reason for it is to allow our panelists to be as much as possible in terms of robustness, to not to box them, not to limit them to certain aspects. So that's why I am going to be talking about the objectives and the sub-themes. There are basically four of them. The first one, just in line with the two questions, the first one is, we are gathered here to facilitate information sharing among local and international actors on leadership and school culture in a challenging world with a view to enhancing collaboration and mutual learning. That's the first theme vis-a-vis the objective. And that you can clearly see that's what we are doing. So we're going to be having a lot of people who are on board to talk to us. So that I think we can achieve. The second objective, the theme is challenge thinking and broaden horizon around school culture for the changing world beyond the current pandemic. Beyond the current pandemic. It might interest you again when I have to call on, when I have to reiterate the word of the first speaker, the CEO of Kagiso. She made use of the term, the new normal. So I don't think, and in our right sense, we can't be thinking of COVID-19 just disappearing. So we've got to live with it. That is what we mean by beyond the current pandemic. The third one is to share good practices and model for school leadership in challenging times. We are here to brainstorm. We are here to share with one another best practices and models that can inform for good our leadership styles, our leadership practices in challenging times. And the last one is to contribute to the emerging vision of how school and learning could be built back better. So these are actually the sub-themes that informed the two questions that I did mention before now. So in the light of that, you permit me to quickly say here that the order of the day, the program, we will have the panel discussion. And in that panel discussion, I am telling you, you are going to enjoy it so much because these are people who have their stars to their badge, who have contributed immensely to education, to the education fraternity, to the education industry, to the education sector. They have their stars close to their chest and they are well known for the good work that they are doing. So it will be an honor to hear from this panelist. I want to specifically, in addition to every other person's comment, to welcome our very MEC of Education, Gauteng Province, Mr. Panyeza Lusofi. We welcome you to this very unique occasion. We thank you for the expertise, for the skills, for the knowledge that you will be sharing with us. The second panelist will be somebody who also has her own star close to her chest and then well known by people far and near. She is the current African Union Continental Teacher Prize winner. That is the person of Dr. L. Bridget Sunyusi. Thank you for honoring our invitation, Doctor. And the third panelist for today is no other person, very known person as well, who has also contributed immensely in our own rights and for which we recognize. That's the head of education, Anglo-American, the person, Miss Zahira Soma. Thank you so much for being here with us. We look forward to learning so much from you. After that, we will be moving straight to the next one after the panelist discussion. We will be having presentations by school principals. Those presentations will be actually made by principals by the Sandbox and the Kagiso Trust school principals. I want to put it to you, please be rest assured that you are not seeing anything yet. In addition to what the panelists will bring, these people are also going to bring something that we will cherish so much. There are Mr. Klaxi Mahalili, the ICT group, Ms. Joy Pelani, Teacher Wellbeing Group, and Mr. Teka from Pahani High School. Okay, so just to run down the table for the agenda, when we move from there, we'll be looking at some of the inputs, some of the contributions as it connects with the theme of today's conference. We'll be looking at some of the input from some of the postgraduate students, particularly as it speaks to their research focus. After that, we'll be going to the breakout rooms where people will also have to come about with some deliberations, discussions around the key questions and the themes, so to say. So that will be the breakout room. That will be precisely between 15:00 hours and 15:20. That will be followed by the plenary breakout groups, feedback on discussion. We'll get that. And we hope the conference will be recapped and concluded with vote of thanks from our own very Professor Duplessis. Thank you so much. So now it's over to you, Professor Yassin. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. These are the two questions that our panel members will be engaging with this afternoon. And the format of the panel discussion is each person gets about 10 minutes in which to discuss this question from these questions from their point of view, and then we'll move on to discussion. I would ask that the audience put all of your questions and any comments that you want to put into the chat, and during the discussion space, I will then pose those questions and comments to the panel. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the MEC, Mr. Penyaza Lesufi, who is very well known in the education circles. Sir, if I could ask you to please go ahead and share your thoughts specifically around these two questions. Okay, we might have lost Mr. Lesufi. We'll try and get him online. Could we then go ahead and ask?
No, sorry. I think I was muted.
Okay. It's wonderful to make your acquaintance, Mr. Lesufi. I don't know if you want to just put your, no problem. If you want to just put your video on, and then we can have this conversation. If you don't mind, if
it's just that I'm using my tablet for the speech, so.
Okay. All right, no problem at all.
You might not see me.
We appreciate your presence. Please go ahead, sir.
Let me thank you and also thank all the fellow panelists and everyone that is on this call. I truly appreciate the invite and I'm looking forward personally as well to the inputs from other panelists on the subject matter of leading schools during these challenging times and the impact of COVID. While significant, the COVID-19 pandemic is unlikely to be the last crisis we will face in our lifetime. And it's not the first time that schools leaders have been called upon to lead through these trying times. There's one report by UNESCO that was penciled a year ago that indicates that close to half of the world learners are still affected, partially so, fully so, by closures related to COVID, and almost over 100 million additional children internationally will fall below the minimum levels that are needed in terms of reading, and as a result of many health crises that we have went through. A World Bank report as well suggests that COVID-19 is likely to cause the first increase in global poverty since 1998. It estimates that COVID will push millions of people into extreme poverty from 2020 and beyond. The impact of this on our young people will be immeasurable, far-reaching, devastating, and potentially irreversible. The Minister of Basic Education over the weekend released a report that indicates the level of learning gaps or losses that we've suffered as a country, especially those that are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. We must aim to provide a meaningful future for our youth that goes beyond employability or simply getting children through matric. In a country where more than 30% of young people are unemployed, we've got to give them the skills they need so that they can survive and thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. So leadership at every level, from school leaders to district officers to provincial departments, is a critical part of an education system. And never more that this leadership is needed, especially in the context of the global COVID-19 pandemic. School leaders in these times cannot simply go about business as usual. Leading in disruptive times and beyond means being able to navigate the new pathways. The waves of school closures and reopening have clearly demonstrated how important good leadership is to learning in all forms. Challenges faced by school leaders in the past have ranged from rebuilding after environmental disasters through to supporting communities through economic, social, and emotional devastation. During these times, school leaders have provided clarity and direction, built resilience, and instilled hope as they remain focused on the best possible outcome for their learners and school communities. School leaders are now caught in the unfavorable position of being the pinch point in the system. They are reliant on guidance about COVID-19 responses, processes, procedures, and protocols from those that are in charge of the education system. And this can change almost overnight, depending how the virus develops. In most instances, you will recall that the president, every time he addresses the nation or what is commonly known as family meetings, all learners and our educators enter a panic mode because they don't know what will change. Simultaneously, school leaders are dealing with fluid and changing staffing situations, meaning they're having to do much more with less. The social distancing of staff and learners means extra work and extra pressure on those staff who can return to work. Every expectation, either from above or below, asks more of our school leaders to professionally and personally intervene in these challenging times. For school leaders working in these demanding and chaotic circumstances, the pressure is relentless, the options are limited, the sleepless nights are frequent, the staff meetings or coffee catch-ups and corridor chats with colleagues that made up of a school day have now gone. All those informal yet important moments were needed to strengthen social relations and build relations amongst people within the schooling environment. Parents, learners, and teachers now exist in a twilight education world, either awaiting the return of normal service or hoping for some new normal that may offer stability, continuity, and reassurance. The stark reality is that neither is likely to occur anytime soon. Being fully aware of the significance of leadership and the inevitability of change, we must consider how to best equip all leaders to respond to the current crisis and create more equitable and resilient education systems beyond it. Prioritizing education recovery is crucial to avoid a generational catastrophe as an education sector. We must also make sure that all efforts to mitigate the impact of school closures and address the learning losses and adapt to the education systems is something that will fall on the shoulders of school leaders. There's no guidebook for school leaders as they make these decisions and try to move forward during the pandemic. With more than 40% of our children rotating classes, the uncertainty is a challenge for school leaders who are often used to orderliness and control. The pandemic has clearly illustrated the importance of effective use of technology and data for inclusion and learning during these times of disruption. During the crisis, school leaders around the world rapidly adapted to new learning environments to comply with the public health regulations and lockdowns. Given the lack of precedent, and in many cases government guidelines, this crisis has been extremely challenging for school leaders, but has also provided an opportunity for them to accelerate change at an unprecedented scale and pace. Despite large-scale national efforts to utilize technology in support of remote learning, distance education, and online learning during COVID-19 pandemic, clear fault lines have indeed emerged. For example, in the US, it has been noted that the pandemic, in the US, it has been noted that the pandemic has highlighted disparities in access to digital devices and the internet. When schools were closed, 15% of US households and 35% of low-income households with school-aged children did not have a high-speed internet connectivity at home. In early April, nearly 2/3 of leaders in high-poverty districts reported that the lack of basic technology was a major problem. Similarly, in the UK, COVID has revealed a stark digital divide, with close to 1.9 million households having no access to the internet and tens of millions reliant on pay-as-you-go services to make phone calls or to access healthcare, educational, and other benefits online. In South Africa, as I've indicated, the no-fee schools that services our communities have limited access to internet. Very few of the country's no-fee schools have access to devices, skills, bandwidth that is needed to provide any form of ICT education. Further, provincial variances also exist in terms of access to funding and other resources to address the technology gaps that exist in all our schools. On the other hand, fee charging schools are better resourced and were more responsive, and in some instances, we can openly declare that they've never been highly affected by COVID-19. In addition, a significant number of schools in South Africa have limited access to connectivity, especially our rural areas, and this has made education delivery extremely impossible or non-existent. The decision by national government to shut down schools in response to the pandemic forced teachers to adapt and innovate to ensure that learning continued despite the challenges that they are facing. But reality is our education system is under extreme pressure, and the only way to survive is to rely on school leaders, in particular school principals. I always argue, and I continue to argue, that a school stand or fall on a good principal. If you don't have a good principal, you'll never have a good school. But are we appreciating the roles that need to be played by principals? In our environment of never-ending list of stakeholders, our principal must jungle amongst many other things. They become victims of decisions of the SGBs that are not influenced by realities inside the classroom. They become victims of teacher unions if they adhere to all the regulations that they need to adhere to. They become victims of learners if they don't adhere to never-ending demands of learners, but most importantly, they further become victims of our communities when communities want to influence or direct school matters in their favors. So our school principals are always under extreme pressure. If they have to comply with SGB requirements or expectations, they will then harm the expectations of teacher unions, by extension, in some instances, harm the expectations of the communities that they serve. I want to argue, and argue strongly so, that a good principal is a principal that is not needed by some stakeholders within the education system. A good principal that ensures that all teachers arrive on time, teach, and also provide services to our learners, they become victims of organized formations. A good principal that wants to ensure that the resources of the schools are appropriately utilized, they become victims of SGBs. A good principal that wants to ensure that learners remain within the learning parameters of the school at all times, sometimes become victims of their own communities. I speak so because of the experiences that I had with some of the principals, where even a principal was shot dead within the school premises purely because those that run businesses in communities, they feel this particular principal does not need. So the role of a principal is a very difficult role. It's a very painful role. And I doubt as the state that we can afford not to have the courage to defend and also provide all the necessary support that is needed to all our principals. Our principals are the CEOs of our schools without the tools accorded to CEOs. Our principals are leaders of the schools without the necessary decision-making powers that leaders need to take. Our principals are stakeholder engagement specialists without the necessary understanding of the same stakeholders on how principals should work. So when we have to debate and discuss leadership during COVID, we need to incorporate all these difficulties. Because if we can speak about managing COVID without managing reality, we'll be donating our principals once more and failing to provide all the necessary assistance that they need. So what kind of a school leadership is needed during challenging times? Starting out as a school leader in the current crisis is daunting, but an intentional and equity-based leadership entry plan can help. Linking all of these principles together is the conviction that education system must transform even more quickly in the wake of the current emergency to avoid exacerbating the learning crisis. In the recent event, many education systems pre-COVID were not working well enough for many, not least the disadvantaged and the marginalized. COVID-19 has redefined school leadership, but at the same time, there are no leadership standards or benchmarks. But school leaders have to be guided by constitutional principles that focus on equity, inclusion, and well-being of all children. This is a foundational, effective leadership that is needed in the current epoch. Effective school leaders will be instrumental in transforming systems, but policymakers, government development partners, and civil society organizations, among others, will need to support and empower them to effect meaningful change and create more equitable, resilient, and responsive systems for our future. During challenging times, the best leaders act as champions for all learners, but especially the most vulnerable. These leaders must focus on the impact of disadvantaged children, young people, and also marginalized girls in particular. Beyond COVID-19, a lesson for South Africa and many other countries is the role that school leaders must play in supporting teachers in co-creating a digital learning environment. For technology to be adopted in schools, the school leadership play an important role in the sustainable use of any educational technology. We must give school leaders ownership of the process, which is vital in the technology adoption process. We must not just dump processes of so-called finalized ICT tools or devices to the principals. They must be part of the initiation, they must be part of the budgeting, they must be part of planning, but most importantly, part of the implementation stages of utilizing technology in our schools. If we only feel they must only be available at the tail end, we'll have missed the point and would have missed the opportunity, and it will take us time to rectify the situation. To this end, school leaders must be encouraged to support teachers throughout the learning journey. School leaders must be the champions of technology in schools, and they need to recognize and be rewarded in their attempt to change the landscape of our education space. I want to conclude by appreciating the changes that we've made within our schooling environment. For example, in Gauteng, we've introduced what we call schools of specialization, because we believe gone are the days that all our schools must offer the same courses with the limited teaching pool that we have within our sector. Each and every school must specialize on a certain trade that can contribute to the economy of our country. Reality is, if you can't get education right, we'll not get the country right. If you can't get education right, we'll not expand the skills base of our country. If you can't expand the skills base of our country, we'll never get the economy right. And if you can't get the economy right, we'll not suit or meet the expectations of our society. Therefore, schools of specializations are schools that are intended to introduce trade skills while learners are still within the schooling system. We've got School of Aviation, where we are teaching learners about careers within the aviation industry. We have schools of engineering, where we are teaching learners on how to unbundle an engine of an aeroplane, a caterpillar, and a helicopter, while they're still within the school premises. We've got the School of Agriculture, where we're teaching children about the importance of food security. We also have schools that are focusing on sports, arts, and other careers. We've also introduced what we called learning expertise, things that will allow our children to have those expertise while they're still within the schooling environment, because those expertise are what we call life survival skills. For example, last year, all our grade 11s in Gauteng were taught the K53 driver's license so that they can have this particular skill that while they're still within the schooling environment. We're also teaching our children on issues that are related to gender-based violence, sign language, and many other things that we really believe are life skills that need to be protected or need to be delivered to our children. As we conclude, we are looking forward to our inputs, we are looking forward to our guidance, we are looking forward to a partnership that would ensure that our school leaders can participate actively in this challenging world. We always say, and we will always emphasize this point, COVID must go back where it comes from. We are tired of you, your days are numbered. We want to go back to our ordinary life, but we can only go back to our ordinary life if we can protect our children and protect our sector. We want to congratulate all the educators and all those that work within this particular sector for accepting the vaccination processes that allowed almost 98% of our staff members in Gauteng to be vaccinated. If we do this, we'll soon, rather than later, see the back of COVID, and our children will be happy again to play in the playing field, and our teachers will be more happy to teach our learners. I wish you well, and hopefully this platform will create an environment that will enhance learning and teaching in our schools. Thank you so much. Truly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us and giving us the value of your immensely interesting words. I like the idea that you say that COVID must go back from where it came from, and that we shall overcome. I would like to now give Dr. Senyusi an opportunity to also respond to the two questions before we go into the discussion space. Dr. Senyusi, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me first know if you want me to put the camera on, or is it fine like this?
It would be lovely to see who you are. I think the audience would love to see who you are.
Okay, it's fine. Thank you very much. Can you see me now?
We can, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking you. And I am looking forward to hear from other panelists. But like what you said, you want me to tell you my personal experience. I've worked as a principal for almost 10 years. And I don't know whether it's to be fortunate or unfortunate, but let me say, I was a principal in a deep rural secondary school, which is Sata Secondary School. In 2020 results, we got position 1 in the province. Then you all know that I was awarded as the best teacher, African Union Teacher Award, and I took position 1 there. But I want to talk about the virus now, how it affected the school, my experience. If I am teacher number 1 in the African Union, you know, it simply means that there are a lot of things, the hard work in the school. And of course, there is one thing that I believe in, working as a team. Because I know that if we work as a team, there is no way that we can go right. Then now, this virus, then unexpectedly, we are supposed to close, and we have our own expectations as a school. At the beginning of the year, we went for a strategic planning. We have our own targets. We do have improvement strategies. And our school is big. It was big because we were having by then 1,900 and something learners, nearly 2,000 learners, 60 something teaching staff. And we were not aware that we were going to have lockdown. It was not easy. It was not easy because I was a principal in a deep rural school. Remember, when we talk about the deep rural school, is the time wherein we do have challenge of learners. Most of the learners are coming from poor families, and it was even difficult for them to have cell phones. And you cannot believe that another challenge was that we were not having these WhatsApp groups wherein learners will be taught. It was very much difficult, but because of the virus, immediately when we were given chance to go back to school, this is where I decided, together with the SMT and the SGB, that educators must start to teach these learners. They must have WhatsApp groups. This is one of the things that I learned, that this virus taught us to be innovative as principals, that you must think fast and act fast, because we were not having time to waste. And it also made most of the schools to in other words, it encouraged teamwork, going extra mile, being committed, because we were forced to have meetings. Remember, the Department of Education will say, have meeting with the SGB, talk to the parents, talk to the educators, have SMT meetings. And it's one good things that I realized that because of the virus, the relationship became very good in most of the schools because you were supposed to work as a team to take decisions together. And another thing that was very much important, this is where learners started to know that they will be taught through the WhatsApp, because we tried by all means to make it a point that, especially the grade 12 learners, because we were having our target, we wanted to achieve that. Remember, we were used to have the best results. In 2019, we were in 95%, and we were aiming 100%. And you cannot believe it. Though having the virus, we ended up having 98%, taking position 1 in the province, in our district. Then, to me, it taught us that if we work as a team, regardless of the challenges, we can make it. And through the pandemic, educators started to be serious because most of them were forced to teach even during the weekends, but online teaching. And that was very good. And this is one thing that, to me, we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but because of the places where we are in deep rural, sometimes it becomes very slow. When the MEC of Education was talking there, I just said in my heart, things are happening in Gauteng, because I know they're doing things fast. But in us, in deep rural, especially where I am in my province, things sometimes become slowly because of the situation, because most of the learners are from poor backgrounds. Then, now because of this pandemic, we are forced to jump in because we must start to do things. Learners must be taught online. Learners must have gadgets, and this is what is happening. To me, it taught us that no. Though we are in the deep rural, we must start to have things. And some of the educators decided to buy gadgets for the learners. And as a school, we had some donors who donated some gadgets to the learners. And to me, though the pandemic was having its own disadvantages, but there were some advantages. Now we are forced to move to the fourth industrial revolution. But what is important, the leader must be innovative. There must be a clear vision, because in our school, when we talk about the vision of the school, we strive for intellectual development, academic excellences. Then it's what I was always telling them, you know what? We believe in academic excellence. Then though we are having this pandemic, we must make it a point that we achieve our goals. We do have our own targets. Though we have the pandemic, we must make it a point that we work hard in order to achieve our target. And believe me, if people are working hard, though we can see that the Department of Education especially is affected seriously because of the closing and the opening. But if people are committed, we are working hard, we are organized, we manage the people well as leaders, we will make it. Nothing will stop us. This is my experience that I understand. Because of the pandemic, we started to embrace the technology. That no, there is the uses of technology is very much important. We need to be creative. We need to be innovative. We must be media literacy. There is nothing that can stop us. And the issue of stakeholder collaboration, that was key. And this is my story of what I saw, that believe me, we can work hard even if we are under pandemic. In our school, we believe in incubation of learners. But because of the virus, there is no way that we could incubate the learners. But you know, we came up with another strategy. We started to group these learners in different households, and the results were excellent. Meaning that, of course, especially myself as the leader, I was under extreme pressure, and I was so stressed, but through teamwork, we managed. And I can say to all South Africans, to all who are listening, principals, if you work as a team, even if we are having this pandemic, believe me, you can excel. Teamwork is important. There is no way that you can change your improvement strategies because of the pandemic. Make it a point that you continue to work hard. If you are saying we will teach these learners, have a way of teaching these learners. Now you can do that through online. Work hard as a team. Involve the SGB. Encourage the learners. Talk to them. Use strategies. Nothing must stop us to move on and to work hard because we don't know when this pandemic will end. And we don't want to disadvantage our learners. Program director, this is my experience. We worked under this, we were having the pandemic, but we ended up excelling, and everybody can excel. If we work hard, if our leaders are supporting us, let us do the work, because we mustn't do what other educators are doing. They are educators now because they know that if you are not feeling well, you can stay at home. You can absent yourself. There are those who are taking advantage of that. They know that they're fine, but they don't want to go to work. They'll just say, I'm not feeling well. It's not what we must do if we want to build our country. If we want our country to compete with other countries, we must be committed. What is needed now during this time is commitment. It's hardworking, dedication. Let us work hard and change our country. Let us work hard as principals. Make it a point that you are there, head on. Make it a point that you work hard, you are hands-on. Then if you have those who are not working, it must be a head-on. You go straight. You tell them that we are here to teach the learners. And learners must not be disadvantaged because we don't want to teach them. Let us teach these learners and we can make it. Of course, there are a lot of disadvantages. Of course, there are a lot of challenges, but there are also some of the things that we gained. Now we are starting to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. We learned a lot from this virus and we can make it. Let us make our country to shine, shining like a star, and build the future of our learners. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Dr. Senyusi. It has been wonderful to hear from somebody who has actually been the continental winner of the Teacher's Prize. And unfortunately, we have lost Ms. Sumar. I think there have been some connectivity issues. So I think we're going to head straight on into the discussion space. And I see that we have quite a robust discussion in the chat. Mr. Lesufi, one of the questions that has arisen in the chat space is really centered around the idea that we need to be flexible and adaptable, in our education system, and your conversation around those special schools in which we can extend the curriculum towards those occupations that may not necessarily be the normal mainstream type occupations. Now, certainly in the tertiary space, a lot of this has already happened in the TVET sector. However, the uptake has not been, the way in which it was intended. So TVET, for example, is not a choice. How do you think, in the future, such special schools are going to be schools of choice, down the line? So I don't know if you want to respond maybe to that question.
Yes, thanks for that. My argument is that, and I know I'll be accused of being controversial. I really felt that the issue of free education was not properly linked to the skills that are needed by the country. That the challenge that we are raising, or area of concern that we are raising of TVET colleges not having an uptake, is purely because we are funding everyone for everything, without necessarily indicating what are the skills that are needed by the country. I'm one of those people, as I said, I know people say I'm controversial. I'm one of those people that believe it's the country that must choose the career for you rather than you choose the career for the country. We can't have, and I'm not disrespecting, call center agents or hair salons or all other things. If the country needs scientists, if the country needs people who will fight the virus, we need to prepare those children now and fund them. But if we are just saying everyone can just go to any higher education institution, choose their own careers, the state will fund. We're not going to manage that. We're not going to cover all this. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say when we provide free education, we must link it to a certain skill. If that skill has to be in TVET colleges, then we'll have the uptake in TVET colleges. But we are one country where every learner wants to go to university. Just go to the University of Witwatersrand or Wits and see how many learners wants to be doctors. Of the more than 4,000 applications that are there, you only take either 400 or 500 learners. Where are the rest? They end up taking other careers that they didn't want because their first choice could not be entertained purely because of space rather than any other. Are we funding expansion of those institutions so that they can accommodate these more learners? No. So my argument, therefore, is that if we can link funding to career path, we link funding to institutional development, for example, assisting universities to grow or tertiary institutions to grow, we'll be in a position to have the necessary skills that we need as a country. But in the absence of that, where people are making their own choices and universities are making their own choices, but the country is not making its own choice about the careers that we need, then the national development plan that we have as a country will remain a plan rather than something that is realized. The reality is that our skills base is shrinking. Those that are good and brilliant are either leaving our country without incentives to ensure that they remain in our country. And those that are funded by private institutions, they are channeled to work for those private institutions rather than work for the country as a whole. So we need to manage that. We need to redefine, repurpose the TVET colleges. I really believe that the government decision to make some of these TVET colleges part of the Department of Higher Education rather than part of the Department of Basic Education in provinces, it means that we are providing support to institutions that will not accommodate our learners. So it's a lot of things that need to be attended to. But basically, I'm saying, yes, we need TVET colleges, but we need TVET colleges that are repurposed. You need TVET colleges that are linked to the basic education system. You need TVET colleges that can absorb learners that come from the education system, basic education system. But those TVET colleges need to be changed in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the quality of their lecturers, also in terms of the products or the courses that they're offering. You can't push the country's children to go to a TVET college that is not responding to the skills challenges that we have as a country. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lesufi, for actually extrapolating. And I think the idea that you are connecting all of this to is if we do not take care of the structure of our education and how we go about education, our economic situation is never going to be improving. Now, there is a question from a principal in a secondary school in Gauteng who is, asking when will it be that all educators countrywide would have access to technology? So for example, one teacher, one laptop. At the moment, we know that the rollout has been expedited, but there are still some schools out there that do not have these, technological facilities to be able to catch up. Any response to that, MEC?
Yes, I know the FET band that is from grade 10 to grade 12, we've managed to ensure that is one classroom, one smart board, one teacher, one laptop, and one learner, either one tablet. The only problem with the tablet rollout to our schools is that unfortunately our learners are not protecting that investment, which it's something that is discouraging. And we thought it's an issue of change management. We introduced change management, but those learners, they either deliberately destroy those gadgets and those devices. So we cannot justify the expenditure anymore. But in terms of educators, I'm quite convinced that almost 98% of our FET band, just from grade 10 to 12, already have their gadgets or their devices. We intend to conclude the grade 8 to 9 in the next financial year, so that the entire high school band have access not only to the devices, but also to data that they can utilize. We have not started the planning in terms of the primary education system, because we did this from our own budget as the province. And I think COVID vindicated us, because when we started this process, people thought that we're wasteful, but COVID vindicated us that this is the future. So we've not done work in terms of primary education, but in terms of the FET, we are proud of what we've achieved thus far on our own without national government, but we remain hopeful that now that everyone sees the importance of ICT in education, that will be appropriately funded so that we can expand it to all grades. Thanks.
No, that's wonderful. So to Julia, principal of that high school, I'm sure that your turn is coming down the line, and there are plans for at least teachers to be kitted out. However, the education of learners and how to protect the devices by learners is one of the quandaries that we're dealing with. MEC, one of the controversial things that are happening in a lot of the education circles right now is online versus face-to-face classroom and that kind of learning. Now, even though we are in agreement that the pandemic is something that has literally forced people into, the thought process of how to equip schools to be able to have online classrooms, there's also been the counter argument that these are not the best ways in which to teach, because children learn through play, they learn through socializing with other children and so forth. What's your take on that argument, and how do you see it going forward?
I really believe both systems supplement each other. You can't replace face-to-face, but also you need online, because face-to-face has limitation of time. You can only teach from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, but we all know education can happen at any time anyway. So we need to supplement both or utilize both. But I'm a proponent of face-to-face, but at the same time, I strongly believe that you also need online or ICT support, because if you're going to confine learning to a certain period, we are far behind if we compare where the world is. We've got our own history, unfortunately, and that history is not nice. The majority of people that were left out of the education system, we need to gallop to close that gap. The world is not waiting for us. And the advantage or the tool that we can utilize to gallop as fast as possible and close that gap is online learning, or what I call ICT education, because that will ensure that we close the gap, and that will ensure that all our learners are at the same path. My only argument, and I really feel it's unfair, is that we're having an education system that the outcomes are different, but the inputs are the same. Let me unpack why I'm saying this. All teachers in this country are trained from the same pot. All teachers are trained from the same universities, but you take the same teachers that qualified from the same university and you deploy them in previously disadvantaged communities and previously advantaged communities. The outcomes are different. And that's what we need to address. Why are the outcomes different, but the teachers are trained from the same pot? There's no university that is training teachers for private school in this country. But the teachers that are teaching in those private institutions, the outcomes, if you check the IEB results, are far miles ahead of the National Senior Certificate. Why? And until we address that question, you can't. And to me, it boils down to one thing: accountability. If teachers are not accountable for the outcome and they are rewarded for failure, as the previous speakers indicated, the principal has indicated that some teachers will even take advantage of saying they are sick when they're not sick, because they believe the systems can be bypassed easily. So until we resolve those kind of issues, I still believe that we'll still beat about the bush about the quality of our education system. I still emphasize the days of minds are over. The future minds of this country is our children in the classroom. And you don't treat gold, diamonds like we are treating our children now, because these are the children that will create jobs. These are the children that will create opportunities. It is how we train them that will determine the future of this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, MEC. There's so many more questions on the chat space that technically you could basically go on until 4 o'clock, but we really appreciate your input and that of Dr. Sinusi, who also, very clearly mentioned what kind of expectation there is of leadership, particularly during this time of crisis. We appreciate the time that you've taken to be in our midst, but the program has to continue. And so we'll continue in our chat spaces as well as on the Twitter spaces and other sort of social media spaces to continue. So thank you very much for your contributions and for your responses to the discussion here this afternoon. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Unfortunately, I might not join until the end, but I really appreciate the time that I spent with you. Thank you.
Dr. Potokri?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Yassin, and a very big thank you to our panelists, who, in my view, have really done justice to the focus of the day. I have learned so much, and I'm sure every other person here in present have also learned so much. We'll be moving straight to the next item on the agenda, and that will be presentations by school principals, presentations by Sandbox and Kagiso Trust school principals. So I would like to take it in order as it is on the agenda. It will be my pleasure to request Mr. Carlson, ICT Group, to avail himself for his wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you
for the opportunity. Allow me to appreciate the opportunity given to be part of this historic moment and career path in my life. Let me, without wasting any time, share my presentation that will always also display who's talking to you. And I believe it is clearly visible that the person who will be presenting on behalf of the Sandbox ICT Group is Lasma Sahlani, the principal of the Ict Primary School, as displayed there. Without wasting much time, I will take you through my presentation. Wherein I'll move straight to the second slide to say Sandbox is a project of 10 primary schools that had been piloted to be part of this historic project. And in Sandbox, we have got 3 schools that have been identified to participate in ICT. Actually, these schools have decided on their own to have their developmental program as ICT to turn the schools to be digitally teaching and learning. So these are the names of the schools. The first one is where I'm the principal, Ict Primary. And then I've got Ict Primary. And the third one is Mama Okwa Full Service, where in all these 3 schools, we are gunning towards achieving one goal, which is turning our schools into digital teaching and learning. Towards achieving this, we traveled a race which is still in progress. We haven't yet got there because we have just started. Remember, while planning for this, especially last year, pandemic hit and disrupted all the education system, as previous speakers has already indicated. That also affected our planning, affected everything that we thought we'll achieve as schools. In the light of that, that also challenged us as under-resourced schools because we couldn't do remote learning because of the digital divide. And what should we do as principals? Because I'm now representing the 3 principals of the schools. We couldn't wait for the department to provide the digital resources, but we said there are platforms that we can use even before the department can come in on board. So the challenges compels us to resort to WhatsApp, Facebook, and Zoom for major communication platforms with parents and staff. Based on the fact that we are under-resourced, it's still a challenge to reach out to all the learners and parents because of the poor community background that our schools exist. We also had to find ways where we can strengthen communities, partnerships with the police, with the social services, based on the digital access, which is still a challenge in our communities. So the return to school, which is a new normal emerged, wherein we come up with rotational timetables and we have to take care of our educators, we have to take care of our learners' well-beings while striving to find that we become a digital learning centers. The digital classroom, which we envisaged, is a dream that could no longer be postponed because the pandemic has shown us that we need that, so that even if physically we are not in classes, we are able to reach out to our learners. As the MEC has indicated, that learning doesn't end up in the official hours of the day. It can continue over weekend and so on. So it's still continuing the program. Now, as schools, what were the first steps that we took to share this vision that we had with our parent community? We engaged with the SMTs and the SGBs on strategic planning to say, this is what we think with our limited budget we can do. Identify the resources that we have and make sure that we plan on what we have and make use of these little resources to get little by little and make sure that our educators have resources and the learners. We also came up with a strategy to learn from one another and to learn with one another in community learning forums or platforms. Because our intention is to secure resources where in our schools, each teacher has got a laptop, each learner has got a tablet, we have internet access that has got speed, and we're proud to also to announce that one of our schools has already purchased a generator because they want to cap the challenge of electricity outage from time to time. We also had issues of whiteboards that we need to purchase and install in our classes because we have not yet gone there. And another thing is that you can't only focus on the resources and forget about the people that are supposed to deal with those resources, which are the teachers. So in terms of the teachers, we made sure that we established teachers to continuously and professionally develop themselves. So we established in the 3 schools the ICT committees, wherein training programs are on course, and then we encourage them to join webinars where they can learn online on how to run and manage schools. In this case, we also allow them and encourage them to join online professional learning committees so that they can not wait for the department, but self-develop themselves. The aim is to take our schools towards digital learning and teaching. In this slide, that's where I broke down 3 schools projects to say, where are we in terms of the 3 schools? At Yukubu, they've increased the Wi-Fi speed. ICT training is on course. In ICT training, we break down the schools into the educators into 3 groups: those that cannot be able to operate digital devices, those who are on the first level, entry level, and those who are on advanced level. So these groups are trained on different days according to different programs and so on. So in all our schools, we've been fortunate to be part of the robotics and coding that is taking place in the department. Just also started on Saturday. Our educators are busy participating in that. And in Lekkerbriek, as I indicated, that they've already accessed the generator. They've already engaged a parent who's coming voluntarily to assist in terms of technology because he has got those expertise. And also the project of robotics and coding is ongoing. And in Mamakwa, the strategic planning is ongoing. They've done it, they've planned everything, their staff training is going on, and also the robotic and coding. Why are we doing this? Because we need to prepare our learners and educators first, make sure that once we have the system up and running, then we are on our own able to implement the intention to be digital teaching and learning centers. Then we focus on the 7 strategies that will assist us, or the steps that will take us to the digital project in our schools. The first step being digital identity, or the footprint. The second one will be, how do we mobilize the resources so that we become those centers that we envisage. The third one is, how do we engage with networks that can assist us to take us to the next level in terms of making sure that we achieve our goal? And how do we enhance access to the resources that will help us? The fifth one is, how do we make informed digital decisions, capacity building of our staff members, and how do we cultivate innovation so that everybody can bring over their best? And this is what was happening in some of the schools, because we've already started in terms of digital leadership. Now, step 1, we look at the digital identity and check, because this program was implemented last year in July. This year in July. So we took audit on the digital tools that we have as a school. We took audit of the networks that are available to us as our 3 schools. And what skills do we have on the record, on site, that can assist us to move beyond these challenges? Secondly, we agreed as the 3 schools that we start from where we are and what we have. We work with what we have and from where we are. Can't compare with ourselves with people who are not in the same environment as ourselves. And our main aim is to start a journey of creating and managing an online presence. Because without doing that, it would be very difficult for us to say, how do we then chart a way forward? And in mobilizing resources, which the program also started in July, we take a look at what do we have as schools, and how do we, and what do we need? So we focus on the available resources, the skills that we need to acquire these necessary capabilities and forge a way forward. How can we put resources into practice? Because we cannot just bring resources without putting them into practice. And then what capabilities do we need to develop, evaluate, and combine and create new resources that we have acquired? And in that, it takes us to the next step in terms of engaging networks that we have. How do we engage with the available networks that can assist us to grow as schools? What partnerships do we need to strengthen as schools? Then we came up with identifying meaningful and partnerships, purposeful partnerships within our schools and outside. Because you can't just focus on yourself, you need to learn from others if you want to become better. How do you construct the sharing of information, knowledge, and resources with other stakeholders, with other educators within the school, with our learners, with our parent communities. We need to navigate on online spaces like Facebook, Twitter, so that this will help us to build our social media ecosystems. And then we encourage our educators and ourselves to participate in free webinars, engage with others online to solve problems that we find ourselves facing in our institutions. And that will also have our teachers encouraged to use webinars to connect locally and globally. Without them traveling, they can be able to have friends over abroad and locally to connect and share good practices in terms of topics within particular subjects. That's what the intention of the digital and teaching learning is taking us as the 3 schools. Then how do we enhance access? How do we improve and constantly learn from each other? The first thing is, how do we find ways to enhance access to online, whether at home or offline? Secondly, how do we expand the digital footprint by creating a personal learning network to engage in collaboration and sharing of this information? Then we have established teacher working groups led by our HODs. And then we established ICT committees that will spearhead this project to make sure that everybody within the school get access to digital devices and they know how to utilize them, because we want them to go to classes and be able to implement, so that when the pandemic continues to be with us, we are able to move beyond it and our schools continue to prosper. Now, we also encouraged our teachers to choose any 3 professional development sessions of their own for continuing professional development per annum. At least if you are in a school and 3 of these sessions you have participated in them, we shall have developed you. And we believe that this will take our educators from one level to the next. And the 5th one is teachers are encouraged to meet other teachers online, locally, and globally. Now, how do we take informed decisions? How do we make informed decisions? Because digitally informed decisions have to be made from a digitally informed practice. The first step that we think we should do is to find approaches, techniques, and frameworks that can assist us to build a foundation, solid foundation, to say, this is the research that we have made. This is how it can work in our schools, depending on the environment that the school exists. And in doing that, that will take us to the next step of building relationships and finding how related technology should be to education, and how related to technology education be related to change. Because if these things cannot be related, it will be a very difficult task for us to achieve our goal. And then we also find a way which will imbibe learning culture that includes technology, because without technology, then we'll be producing learners who will not be participating in this global world. And our teachers we encourage them to participate in online courses and online webinars on their own, because they can't wait for the department to always provide. This is what we have embedded in our institutions. Now, when we look at how do we capacitate our staff members that we have, because we have agreed in the beginning that we work with what we have, how do we digitally equip them, the teachers and our learners? So the steps that we took is to look at the in-depth knowledge of the teachers that will be forming the basis, and the learners. Do we have them at 0 level, or are they at entry level, or are they at advanced level? So in majority of our educators in all the 3 schools, our educators are at 0 level. So they need to be taken to at least entry level before we can go and fully implement this program in the schools. But this is the project that we have done, making sure that we will be to advance this program when we want our schools to be digitally teaching and learning. We need to know the strengths and the constraints that we have with our learners and educators. Because once you don't have that information, you'll be planning on something that you cannot be able to move out of it, because you'll be addressing challenges that you do not know they exist. strategies of facilitating to mobilize these resources. We came up with strategies to say, what are the strategies to get these resources? First, we start with what we have with the SGP, and then individually schools can go out and look for funding and so on before the department can come in, because in our province, we have not yet got to that level of being assisted in that regard, but we can't wait for them. As the little that we have, we can be able to improvise. And then we also have strategies to engage with stakeholders who are interested in what we are doing, because I also believe in sharing what our good practices with our community structures to say, this is what we are doing as a school. Can you put in a hand so that we can assist in terms of resource accessibility? And lastly, on that strategies, we say, what are the strategies that we need to develop the ability to repurpose the resources? We need to get resources that will be used as multi-purpose, not a resource that will be only meant for one function, but a resource that can be able to be used for multi-purpose. Like when you have your smart board there, can it be turned into a screen where it can be used for other exercises and so on? So those are the resources that we think and believe they can be of coming handy to our rescue. Moving forward now to the last step that we have said is to say, how do we cultivate innovation in our learners, in our educators? And this program that I'm indicating, especially from number 5, number 6, and number 7, they are still in progress because they are very much advanced in such a way that in our current space, we have not yet got to that level. So these are projects in progress. How do we create space, learning space for innovation and experimentation? As leaders, we need to make sure that we open up our schools to be able to accommodate innovations and experimentation by the educators that we have. We don't put educators pressure on innovations that they brought because we feel that they are challenging us as educators, as leaders. We feel we need their strength, we need their expertise to assist us to achieve our goal. So we come up with support innovative ideas, create space for innovations, and then we have an approach where our educators know that failure is part of growth. And we also have an attitude where we know that these educators must think out of the box and work with what they have before somebody else can bring these things to themselves. This is the attitude that we have created in our schools. We encourage our teachers and learners to be big dreamers and big thinkers, because without that, we will not be able to solve the challenges that we face that are brought by the pandemic. And then we need educators who can see the same future for every child, not only for specific children. And I remember in one of the conversations with Prof. Kat, I said to her, in my own personal opinion, I don't believe the whole world, we have a school that can stand out to say we are the best school. And then she asked me why. I said, because if we had best schools, we will not be waiting for 18 months for people to get the cure for the vaccine. So that's why we're starting today to digitally teach our learners and produce learners that can be able to go out there, research, and come up with strategies where they can be able to get vaccines for the next coming pandemics in a very short space of time before a lot of people lose their lives, because 18 months to me is a lot of time before we can get the solutions. So in conclusion, colleagues, this is what I want to share with you, that if schools continue to follow this outdated educational models focusing on preparation and industrial workforce, they run the risk of becoming irrelevant to our students and communities. And that is by Eric C. Scheninger. And by the same token, I'm saying, if education leaders follow an outdated model of leadership, we run the risk of becoming irrelevant to the schools we serve. Therefore, we will not be addressing the challenges that the nation and the world is facing. On that note, I thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely presentation. I can see from the chat box that people seems to be nodding their head as you were making your presentation. That tells you that you were not only speaking to, you are speaking to both the body, the spirit, the soul, the intellectualism and everything. Thank you. The next presenter will be the person of Miss Joyce Pilani. Miss Joyce Pilani from Teacher Wellbeing Group. She'll be talking to us, presenting our own view. So the floor is yours, Miss Pilani.
Thanks, Dr. Profa, for the opportunity given to me, Doctor. Hi, my name is Joyce Dikeledi Pilani, principal at Mampatile Primary School in Waterberg District, in Limpopo Province. Our presentation is based on the following: school culture on teacher and learner well-being. This slide, the COVID-19 and teacher well-being. There are two things there that we have to balance at work, life. The COVID-19 pandemic brought with it a crisis that needed principal to pay closer attention to both teacher and learner well-being. Mampatile and Dagbreek Primary School are the two, Mampatile and Dagbreek Primary School are the two sandbox schools that choose well-being as a central focus for their school culture and transformation project. Fear of contracting the virus stimulated anxiety, stress, and burnout among teachers in general. But when one teacher contracted and recovered from the virus, he did not go near the learners, their parents, and resist that. The stigma attached to being infected, with COVID-19 and the misinformation about it required urgent attention from the school principals. Teacher consultation, the two schools agreed on teacher consultation based on the following survey. As the first step, a qualitative questionnaire was created with the following questions. Number one, since the reopening of schools, what is your general feeling, atmosphere, school environment? There's a lot of uncertainty about life these days. Kindly mention any of this that you encounter. How can this situation be kept? What can the school do or assist in alleviating your fears? There were responses concerning the teacher consultation. The general feeling about returning to school showed that 98% of teachers felt that the general school environment was not conducive for teaching and learning to take place. It's a traumatic situation on both teachers and learners. The school environment is unsafe as exposure to sick learners and colleagues were a constant fear. The responses, again, it says 83% of teachers reported that they felt afraid of contracting the virus. Death as a challenge to both the teachers and the learners. Poor emotional well-being of both the teachers and the learners. Curriculum coverage. There were also a challenge with the curriculum coverage. Teachers couldn't manage to cover the curriculum because of a new normal. the rotational timetables, the comorbidities of other educators. It was also a challenge to teachers. And then the department come up with a trimmed curriculum, the ATPs to educators. Another responses, it says 100% of teachers felt that people need to be educated and informed about COVID. A COVID-19 awareness campaign is needed, and there should be counseling provision made for teachers. Suggestion for support, encouraging all of us not to fear, but to adapt to a changing life, giving our hearts to the Almighty, and continue to follow the COVID-19 rules and regulation and wait for the vaccine. And indeed, the vaccine did came. All educators were vaccinated in Limpopo. Support from everyone around us. Offer counseling and staff and learners who have lost their loved ones, because we didn't have time for grieving for these learners, mourning as we always do in our traditions. Be COVID-19 compliance at all times. Supply enough PPEs. The department managed to supply PPEs to all the schools and other resources, and making sure that social distancing is maintained at all times. Provide workshop and distressing sessions, someone to talk to, workshop to dispel myth and misinformation. Focus not only the work, but on how teachers are feeling as well. Be flexible and allow teachers time to mourn without pressure to return to school. Focus on a school culture where well-being is central. When we move to the focus, action were taken, a focus on where well-being is central. Actions were taken about that. An open door policy by the school leadership team. Teachers are invited into conversations. A deliberate effort to meet and talk to teachers informally through the school day. WhatsApp group were created among staff where motivational and well-being materials are shared. A workshop with health officials to educate teachers and learners about the pandemic. Invitation to hospitals where Mrs. Engelbrecht, the psychologist and also a teacher, come to school and then talk to the parents, the learners, and the community concerning this pandemic. Partnership with local hospitals, psychologists, where teachers can consult where required, because also teachers, they need support from this COVID-19. A buddy system so that teachers support each other. The creation of healing. Through the survey, teachers at Mampatile Primary School suggested creating healing circles where life stories can be shared with learners. In this slide, healing circles, where we see a group of people holding hands together. Healing circles are often called hokaka in the Lakota language, which means a sacred circle. Healing circles allow people to share in healing, benefiting from collective energy of the group, supporting each individual to grow and strengthen themselves. During healing, the learners with trauma can share their anxiety, the fear that learners have. They can come and share in the group. Healing circle can help learners deal with the trauma. Teachers are in the process of creating healing circles as a way in which they are able to support themselves and the learners. The format and design of these circles are under development at the moment. Teachers are taking ownership of their own and for learners' well-being. We hope that a focus on well-being will be implemented into all aspects of the school life. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. As you can see, we put hands together, we share our traumas, we share our stories, we share our grief with learners, with everybody, the community at large, the SGB, the parents that come to school. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer control our lives. To heal. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Colin? Dr. Potokari? Maybe you are muted?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just thank you so much, Joyce Pilani, for the very different perspective that you have brought into this discussion from the stance of the well-being. I like the experiential knowledge that led to the development of the questionnaire. It just shows that you as a group are committed, and the extra miles that you have taken to deal with pandemic-related issues vis-a-vis leadership. We appreciate that. We have learned so much in that regard, and I do hope that the conversation will be ongoing. Very quickly, I would request humbly the presence of Mr. Tika from Filani High School to share his thoughts with us. The floor is yours, Mr. Tika. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Everybody, good afternoon. I'm going to share with you this afternoon the leading a school during challenging times with the impact of COVID-19 in catalyzing the fourth industrial revolution driven culture of learning. As I indicated, I am Prince Teka from Pafani Secondary School. The topic that I'm going to share with you is topic number 1, what kind of school leadership is needed during challenging time? And the topic number 2 is what are some of the key imperatives highlighted by pandemic, which we should hold on to as we build back. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you initially the environment or the background where we are. The community where we are is a typical remote rural area dominated by poor-stricken families. There are some child-headed families, of course, with a high rate of unemployment. Most parents are unskilled and illiterate. With the learners currently at our school, our enrollment is 900 plus. The grade 12 are currently 131 with a trend. We are always enrolling more than 100 learners per annum. We are only operating in 13 classrooms at our school. The performance on average is 84.3% since 2003, 18 years across. Last year, we achieved at 85%. All those learners, of course, they are poor and vulnerable. Mostly they are getting frustrated. And the large number of learners do not even see any importance of schooling. The educators, we are having 29 staff complement, currently 4 vacant. That is a deputy principal and 2 HODs plus 1 PL. Most of the educators are, of course, young, but difficult to change. Although we are aware that change is inevitable and it will happen with your help or without it. You may be a traditional person who likes life as it is, but your life has changed all around you since your childhood, and it will continue to do so for you, your children, and theirs. Of course, you don't have to like it, and you can't even resist it, but you will not stop it. That's why we are encouraging our educators, both learners and even the parents, to make sure we all change so as we can struggle to adapt to a new normal. Let me start with this. What kind of school leadership is needed during the challenging times? Of course, we are in a new normal. A pro-change leader is flexible on doing things differently. The environment where we find ourselves is changing into a technological mood of teaching and learning. Of course, resources are basically software-based, and teaching takes place in the form of blended and visual. With ourselves at our school, we are having smart boards installed in some of the classrooms and whiteboards in all the classrooms, and we are having the digital projectors. And again, at our school, in this new normal, a normal classroom in this era accommodates a maximum of 25 learners. And differentiation and tracking of learners' performance on quarterly basis. And the learners, of course, attend on rotational basis, where per day, we can only accommodate two grades. Grade 12 is always at school. Then it alternates with other grades 8, 9, 10, and 11. It's either we accommodate grade 11 and 12 or so on. But the grade 12 is always there. The opportunities, so far, we are so successful because we have managed to have 90 tablets which were provided by the Maths and Science Technology project, and we are having 48 laptops used mainly for teaching and learning the subject computer application technology. And we are having smart board, mobile and mounted screen, and whiteboards are used as teaching aids. Digital projectors project audiovisual information during teaching and learning activities. With the connectivity, we have Wi-Fi and other different signals from different network service provided to us. And although there will be some challenge with a poor network reception, but we are not folding up our arms and wait for manna from heaven. We keep on doing our work as much as we can. With the data for the above resources, the school provides data for connectivity from the school coffers. But unfortunately, it is always the case. We encounter the following threats or challenges. The network is not fully guaranteed. The available gadgets, as we indicated, they are too little for our learners. As we indicated, the school enrollment is more than 900. Then the gaps between teacher training and reality definitely is a crisis. Appointments do not address the new normal dispensation of fourth industrial revolution, although it's our priority. Educators not yet fully adapted to use new system, even if some are young, but not actively using platform for teaching and learning. Instead, they're using it for personal gain and entertainment. That is a resilience, it persists. That is part of the attitude of the educators, and of course, sometimes, but they are getting motivation not to resist. The work given to learners to be completed at home by using the gadgets, only small percentage managed, but majority fails due to family backgrounds, child-hated, vulnerability, remoteness, and even deep rural. And again, this is a very serious problem, the lack of classrooms to accommodate maximum learners because of the social distance. Some of the key imperatives highlighted by this pandemic, which we should hold on as to build back better, are the following. The principal is the one who takes a lead so that the process doesn't get hampered. The role of the principal on instructional leadership, managing the culture of excellence, timetable, analyzing the results to inform differentiated approach and the risk analysis. The key is planning to achieve our desired outcome by the principal and the team. And it also goes on to improve learner outcomes where the curriculum management ensuring coverage at all times, implementing the assessment plan and ensure the wellness of learners and teachers as we are working hand in glove and together. Also, the usage of ICT incorporate into teaching and learning. The IC providing time and resources for teachers and learners. Other effective support strategies for enrichment are deployed, such as notebook strategy. This strategy is very important in such a way that we can get clearly on how the learners are continuously writing. We need to engage our learners continuously on writing. Remember, our learners in grade 12 in particular are divided into how they are performing. At the end of the current year with the grade 11 learners, we start to predict the type of the result that you're going to achieve the following year by analyzing, by arranging the learners in a merit form, for the reason that the top 20 learners will be accommodated in the first class, in the first grade 12A, will be the learners that we will be pretty sure that this type of learners will become the cream of the school at the end of the day. And the second top 20 will be taken into the next class. And the third top 40 as well, and so on and so on. We will be knowing very well those learners who are at the bottom of the list. They are arranged in a certain class where the special attention will be given to them. The educators, while will be going for teaching in that classrooms, they will be aware of the type of the learners or the group that they are going to face. Hence, we are saying all learners, of course, should proceed and pass. Still, on the very same issue of building back better, the stakeholder, the leadership across the SMT, teachers in class, learners leadership, they are continuously monitoring and support for effective teaching, training partnership with advanced institutions, sharing best practices, working towards attainment of the vision and goals. The STP is also there, giving a support. More especially, the governance mandatory is fulfilled. The school culture is very much important and should be taken to, so that the culture of teaching and learning is not disorganized. We are having a very strong team which is implementing the variety of strategies to sustain the performance and enhancement of values and practices. The stakeholders' engagement, more especially particulars, parents, they are there cooperatively. They come to collect and return the gadgets that we are dishing out to the learners, more especially to those learners who can afford, more especially taking care of our environment. They also come and collect the tasks for their children for completion of specific tasks assigned, provision of security within the school environment, and also navigating the results. We are also there having the building blocks or the strategies of excellence. Of course, a school leadership team, more especially the principal and the deputy, develop and manage a culture of excellence. Not forgetting that we are also building a strong teamwork. Therefore, most importantly, again, learner motivation. The learners are achieving because they are constantly reminded of their potential. There is no learner who is supposed to fail at the end of the academic year. We are pretty sure and optimistic enough that all the learners must pass by the end of the year. The only difference will be the form of achievement. As I indicated, the grade 8 quarterly basis, the grades are also the classes, grade 12 up to grade 12. They are rearranged according to the first quarter performance. Even the third quarter performance, they also rearrange and get motivated. With the last quarter, including the trial examination, they also rearranged for us to have an insight and idea of those learners who are constantly performing. Then we'll be having an idea on how the enrichment will go to all the learners, so that we'll be having a clear picture on how they are performing. We also build the positive climate and prioritize, determine, decide, and act on decisions. And we collaborate. Resilience, performance is also built through the expertise of the colleagues as teamwork. In conclusion, note, we are saying no one has yet realized the wealth of sympathy, the kindness, and generosity hidden in the soul of a child. The effort of every true education should be to unlock that treasure. Merci beaucoup. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Teka. Thank you so much. We cannot appreciate enough the time, the quality of your slide is clearing, I must admit. And you have, like every other presenter, you have indeed done justice to this topic. I'm sure many of us, like I do, have learned from your presentation as well. So very quickly, in the interest of time, I'll be moving straight to the next item on the agenda. So we've got students who are also willing to bring in their own kind of input, perhaps from a different angle. That's left for us to see as they make their presentation. So we're going to have two of them. The first one I will call right now. His name is Mr. Mike Adeoye. Please, Mr. Mike, the floor is yours. Let's hear from you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Ayodeji Adeoye, a PhD student in the Sandbox project, and my research is centered around reimagining the culture of learning that is required for the development of innovative learning environment. But before I go into my presentation today, I would like to share a quote with us by Gibson in his book, Rethinking the Future, where he speaks of leaders as explorers, adventurers, trailblazers, and leaders of leaders. He also says that leaders gather around themselves, people that have the future in their bones. Considering this quote, I begin my presentation by sharing a small part of my research with us today. I've looking at research, literature, trying to define what school culture means. I discovered that school culture is an important aspect in the successful running of a school, but it is a very difficult concept to define, meaning that it is elusive. So for the purpose of this presentation today, would refer to school culture as a complex pattern of norms, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, ceremonies, traditions, and mites that are deeply ingrained in every organization. It is also the transmitted pattern of meaning that helps to shape how people think and how they act in an organization. Before I share the result of my findings in my research, I would like to give us two visuals of two different schools from the 10 schools in this sandbox project. The first school is Abatulutili Primary School, which we can see from the left-hand side of the screen. And the second one, the Kubu Primary School, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. Abatulutili Primary School seems to be a school that is built around community, built around participation, and a school that has the culture that allows learners to be who they are and be free to express themselves, as we can see in the picture of the little girl dancing within the class. Well, the Kubu Primary School is a school that is built around a learner-centered instruction, where learners interact with the environment in the process of teaching and learning. We can see from the pictures that learners are at the center of learning, where they interact with IT gadgets, where they are planting in the farm, where they create their own game and also learning from the field. So this gives us a picture of some of the schools in the Sandbox project. And this shows that every school in the Sandbox projects are unique in their own capacity, with their own culture. Moving on, because the principles are at the center of my research, it is imperative that we find out what the principles understand by school culture, or how they define school culture. Therefore, we did a metaphor drawing to understand what they understand as school culture, or how they define school culture. And we found three basic themes from their metaphor drawing. And the first theme is people, community, and relationship, which we can see from the drawing. We have people in a circle, which represents community. We also have the hand that has a heart, which also signifies a living being as people as well. And the sub-theme that emerges from this particular theme is that it takes a village to raise a child. The second one, distributed leadership, relationship building through trust and having a common vision. Working together, all for one and one for all. And love as the primary component of school culture. In this particular theme, the school culture is reflected in relationship building with all stakeholders, including the learners in the school, so that everybody has a common vision that they all buy into and collectively work towards. The second theme that emerges from our findings is a tree or a living system, where each part of the tree represents different things. The first one, the roots, represent the learning, teaching, and the learning environment. While the second one, the trunk of the tree, represents the shared mission and vision of the school. While the leaves represent different components that makes up everything that happens within the school, which we have the partnership, the empathy, creativity, innovation, collaboration, resources, accountability, efficiency, agency, fund of knowledge, and culture. And the sub-theme that emerges here is that a living system in which every dependent part depends on the order to function effectively within the school. And participation by all stakeholders in decision-making is important. So the roots rely on the trunk to support the leaf. Everyone has one mission or the other to do, and they are interdependent on one another to achieve the goal of the school. School culture here is reflected in the components that makes up a living system that depends on the strength of the order from the root anchoring the trunk and the trunk supporting the leaf. And the last thing that emerged from my finding is a process or integration of role or flows or circles, which we can see from the picture as well. And this particular thing talks of circles of integration of events that make learning possible. A process that must be accounted for before learning can take place. And the last one, an integration of roles that supports learning. So school culture here is depicted as a series of activity, processes, and integration of events that must be done or accounted for learning to take place in a conducive environment. So after these three themes, we came up with a definition for my particular research in the Sandbox project, which we are working with. And the definition goes thus: a living system of relationship, a way of being built by every member of the learning community, including the learners, so that the core of teaching and learning supports the changing goals of education, capitalizing on resources available, digital or otherwise, that make school in any context a conducive space for innovation in, of, and from learning. In the sight of the definition, how has this definition been useful to the principals in the Sandbox project and we, the learners, or the students in the Sandbox project as well? We've been able to come up with 5 ways that this particular definition has helped in promoting or in forging us ahead towards the project. And the first thing that we discovered was that the need to create a culture of learning that acknowledges the need for digital development becomes imperative. Number 2, strengthening the stakeholders partnership. Strengthening the stakeholder partnership is a core component of decision-making. Participation by all stakeholders is an important part of being in decision-making. Number 3, depict a Maslow before Bloom approach, where the social, economic, and emotional needs of learners are prioritized before the completion of curriculum. 4, where distributed leadership means co-opting young teachers into SMTs, into committees responsible for teaching and learning, innovation, because they have the insights and knowledge and skill in this aspect. And lastly, strategically allocating resources so that the teaching and learning agenda is strengthening towards 21st century skill development. And I end my presentation with this particular quote from Dell and Peterson that says, the school culture, a complex web of traditions, rituals that have been built over time as teachers, students, parents, and administrators working together and deal with crises and accomplishments together. Culture patterns are highly endured, have powerful impacts on performance, and shapes the way we think, act, and feel. Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Many thanks to Mr. Mike Adediji for your lovely presentation. From what I can tell, central to your presentation, you have kept emphasizing the need for strategic allocation of resources, particularly when we look at the time we find ourselves now. We can see how useful that is, because leaders themselves are resources. And like I know from some previous teachings of the former Vice Chancellor of Wits University himself, like many others, have argued that the academic staff, leaders, and the likes of them being resources are central to the status of whatever the institution would be. So thank you very much, Mr. Adeoye, for that presentation. Quickly, may I have Ms. Mariska? Mariska, you have the floor. Let's get your presentation underway.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited about the study that I'm busy undertaking. Just to introduce myself, I am Mariska van Rienen. I'm currently a master's student in the Sandbox project. I'm the operational head of a combined primary and high school. I have a passion for helping people grow and assisting in guiding them to fulfill their full potential, as I truly believe that that is what will create future game changers that our country and the world desperately need. To start off, I would like to ask everyone to click on the link. I'm going to share it in the chat as well. And then you can, let me just copy the chat quickly.
It's already on the chat. It's already on the chat.
Perfect. Right, so if you click on that link, if you can just complete for us to finish the sentence. Every school leader deserves, and only 1 or 2 words, what you think they deserve. At the end of the presentation, we will pull up a word cloud to show the feedback on that statement. Right, so this, my study, an overview of my research project, is my main question is in what ways does a social emotional learning approach to leadership positively impact the culture of learning in low quintile Limpopo schools? So I will use the head, heart, and hands model to explore social emotional learning, and the outcome is to transform a culture of learning into a positive and sustainable positive effect of what we do and how we adapt to change. So if you look at this model, when we say we look at the head, that's when we are all tend, especially I think educators, we don't really like change. So it's very difficult, and I mean, COVID, that's the only thing it brought with it was change. So we need to convince our heads as leaders of schools why certain changes are needed, why we need to go back and review things that we have done before that now needs to be done differently. If we can convince that change to happen, we also speak to the heart. So we feel that that change is required, which then eventually leads to the capability and ability to action the change. So people actively doing and implementing the change needed. So just another breakdown, when we refer to the head as what I've showed in the previous slide, this is where we look, where my study will explore how social emotional learning approaches are used by the principals at Limpopo schools. Referring to the heart, I'm trying to establish how effective social emotional learning approaches are on maintaining a positive culture of learning. And then making it practical with the hand is to get to recommendations on how social emotional learning approaches can sustain the changes that we require for a positive culture of learning. A few topics that will be explored in this study that is still underway will be the importance of educational leadership, transformational and distributive leadership, the importance of vision setting. We will look at the meaning of social emotional learning and how it's applied at Limpopo schools. What is an effective culture of learning? How do we look after our staff's well-being, because all of this link together. And then we will also look at the effects of what COVID-19 have on school leadership approaches. How can we sustain a culture of learning during and after this pandemic? So we look at exactly what conditions are required for the implementation of social emotional learning in the low quintile schools. So just to explain and elaborate a bit more on exactly what social emotional learning is and why it is important, I want to show the next video to everyone.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
To make this study relevant to South African schools, as I'm part of the Sandbox project, I'm specifically looking at Limpopo schools. All the COVID-19 challenges that we are faced with, and on top of that, we have poor infrastructure, insufficient resources, a shortage of trained or qualified teachers, or very overworked and tired teachers. So my study aims to see how principals can apply SEL methods through the head, heart, and hand model, specifically in low quintile schools, because I firmly believe this is where we need to start addressing problems posed by our country's persistent inequalities in education. I also think when we have answers to these questions, it will facilitate long-term changes on a positive culture of learning in South African schools, which again gives me hope for our country and the world. Right, I'm in reflection, so this is where the word cloud will come up. I don't know on the IT side when they will share that. will ask now in the chat. But if I reflect and I think of all the reading and everything I've done so far in the study, I really believe every school leader deserves not only to be overworked and not only to always have the answer, we also need a checkup from the neck up. We need to be the best that we can be for our teachers, which then filter down to the children. We also deserve mental health support, growth and transformation, safety, self-regulation, and to be equipped with skills that can lead to change. Right, I'm gonna quickly look in the chat. I see the link for the
Hitesh, please put up the word cloud.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you. Right, and there you can see some feedback. We deserve support from others, transformation, cooperation, encouragement, recognition, peace of mind, leadership development, to be supported. So just to name a few. So I think it's important for us to focus on our leaders as well and say, how can they develop social emotional learning skills, make sure teachers understand that, and filter through to children for next level education. I thank everyone for your time. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mariska. Mariska, somebody's asking for the link to your video. If when you have a free moment, could you just put that onto the chat, please?
Perfect. I'll do that now.
Over to you, Colin.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Mariska, for your wonderful presentation. We really need to learn about emotions. It's indeed something vital for leadership. Talking to the different types of leadership, which you brought up here, further opens the window for us to think deeply of the most appropriate kind of leadership that we will need during this crisis. So we thank you so much for that presentation. It's in line with the theme of this conference. We are looking forward to the findings of your study, and we wish you all the best with your studies. Thank you. At this point, I would like to call on Prof. Yassim to take it from here, and let's see what happens thereafter. Thank you, Prof. It's over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Colin. We are unfortunately really running out of time, so we would have loved to have had the breakout rooms where we could have a very interactive audience conversation. Unfortunately, due to various reasons, time is really against us. So my behind the scenes crew have thought up another really nice activity that we can still get you involved in. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up a Mentimeter exercise that requires you to actually respond to our 2 questions. And then we are going to, like we did with the word cloud, pull up that Mentimeter exercise, on both these questions in order to allow us to see some of the conversation that might have crossed your mind as you listen to the speakers speak and as you engaged with people in the chat and so forth. So the first question that this entire conference today is based on is what kind of school leadership is needed during challenging time. And right now on the chat, you're going to find a little exercise which allows you to enter into a link and start to give your inputs into that question. So let us start with that question, Mitesh, and then we'll pull up the results of that question first before we go to the second question. So we just give you maybe a minute or 2 to actually get going with that. And in the meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start going into the chat space to start dealing with some of the chat conversations, which has been so beautifully robust and active. And I really appreciate everyone's contribution here. So let's just maybe randomly choose. Louisa Perigo, wonderful contribution here where you talk about disruption in education, where change needs to happen, you know, at all levels. And one of the things that you really focus on is how we need to work on effective use of ICT. And again, I think you are pulling on the MEC's contribution to say, you know, we do need to look into a hybrid sort of way in which we deal with teaching and learning. However, teachers are daunted and overwhelmed with a lot of the developments that's happening in that space. And as everyone would know, technology is something that changes every day and new things come on the market. At the moment, even at the university, we are dealing with how to invigilate exams, for example, you know, online. And so one of the things that Louisa is talking about is how do we work with teachers positively? How do we create a space for positive development for growth and innovation? And then how do we encourage them to integrate innovative methodologies in their practice? And we know that this is going to take time, but what would be the ways in which school leaders can develop this competency and this you know, curiosity and this type of continuous professional development? And I think Louisa Mahalani, Principal Class Mahalani, spoke to some of these points, but I think he was coming from a point of under-resourced schools and how they start from wherever they find themselves and how they use all of the resources that are available to them to get the digital, you know, development process going. So Louisa, a really nice contribution there. Then we also got, you know, Amelia, who talks about technology being an excellent tool. And what she loved about some of the contribution here is to allow educators to feel free to explore. And I think Klaas also mentioned this idea of allowing space for failure, so that people don't feel like if something doesn't work out, that they're going to be penalized. And so how do we allow for spaces for development, but at the same time provide them, you know, with the necessary support that they would need? And then we have perhaps another contribution where we talk about Julia again coming in with resources becoming central to learner and education and educator performance. And in this space, of course, the leadership is important, because when resources are required, even though you may not have resources right now, how do you strategically develop plans? How do you work with your business community? How do you work with your SGB and other people, you know, who could make resources available? But I think what Klaas also spoke to in his presentation was really centered around repurposing resources. So you might have a resource that was meant, you know, for something in particular, but then how can that resource also become repurposed in order to support some of the needs? So a lovely, robust conversation on the chat. But Mitesh, I wonder if we can just maybe put up that Mentimeter, you know, exercise, you know, if we have the results already, how can we put that up so that we can have a look at that? So, you know, I see the word innovative coming up here, you know, more than once. And I think that given our contextual environment right now, this consideration of innovation is really, really important. Then there's a lot coming up around, you know, a kind of leadership that is positive, that has a long-term view and resilience. Somebody has put here high IQ and AQ of a leader, but also we have the concept of EQ, which again is coming up. But again, we can see innovation coming up many, many times here. Here's one consideration, which is quite big: a leadership that encompasses compassion and assertiveness. In other words, a leader must know how to toggle between the idea, between the space of being available and having an open door policy and compassionate with the challenges of staff and of the entire school community. But at the same time, they need to be assertive in order to reach specific goals and to make decisions that will be in the interest of the school and specifically in the interest of learner. And then a leader who works as a team, who's a lifelong learner, who's, prepared to learn, all kinds of things, including technology, who supports their staff and who shares ideas and is acceptance of change. Again, somebody who's dynamic and collaborative and a solution-minded forward thinker, willing to listen to challenging and opposing voices. So again, I think many of the presentations kind of spoke to a lot of what's coming up, in terms of what the audience is feeling right now. Agile and resilient. Now, learning agility is one of the things that we have one of the students talking about tomorrow. He's a PhD candidate. And so again, we're going to build on some of these concepts that you bring about in today's conversation. And then again, this idea of thinking on your feet, of being able to take control of things during a time of crisis. And surprisingly, the literature is actually showing that women in particular are really great at handling crisis. We hear so much around women in leadership and how difficult it is for them to break through some of the glass ceiling. But it seems like a lot of the literature is pointing out to the fact that in a time of crisis, a woman leader is actually able to handle crisis, much more. That doesn't mean that men, are excluded. It just means that it's one of the times in which they have perhaps a little bit more of the feminine skills that enable them to be able to, move forward. And now we also have this idea of professional learning communities. And again, we are seeing this over and over again, that a leader cannot work in isolation, that there needs to be spaces in which leaders, collude with other leaders, where there is a joint, conversation that's happening. And of course, I'm laughing with you, Verity, think like a girl, guys, I love that. Thank you so much for that, put on the chat. So this idea of professional learning communities, not just for teachers and for professional development and curriculum development and how to learn online, but also for leaders. How do leaders band together? And of course, the sandbox is living proof that when leaders get together, they sort of think that great minds can really make things happen. So, I really love what has come out of this Mentimeter exercise. So thank you so much, guys, for participating in that. Without further ado, let's go to the next exercise. Mitesh, again, if you could just put, the Mentimeter, question or the link onto the chat. The question, just to remind everybody, what are some of the key imperatives highlighted by the pandemic, which we should hold on to as we build back better? So if you could just maybe contribute to that. Again, I'm going to toggle over to the chat and try and pick up some of the chat conversations that we might have missed out on previously, just so that we get voices, into participation here. So let me, Ritesh, okay, there we go. All right, so let's look. Verity, I love you, really, honestly. You just, stole my heart when you say, guys, we should think like the girls. So again, Verity, not to, crowd your space, but just to say that you put into the chat, in a world where emotion is seen as weakness, it is difficult for leaders to display this. Imagine how difficult this is for learners. And again, here, I want to bring into cognition Joyce Pilani's presentation and Mariska's presentation around the social emotional learning that a leader is going to have to be sensitive to. And of course, bringing that back to the Mentimeter exercise where compassion, came up as much as innovation did. Again, just to see that we should open safe spaces for people to be, comfortable with sharing their emotions. And I think even in royal families at the moment, people are focusing on mental well-being and mental health issues as not something as a deficit or seen as a weakness, but something that we need to create safe spaces for, and we need to create support for. Again, Joyce Pilani in this particular case spoke about those healing circles, which she and her colleagues are working towards. We did write a Mail and Guardian article about this if people are interested in some avenues around these healing circles. And the idea being that teachers wanted to be prepared in terms of providing these healing circles within their classroom spaces so that learners, could be supported in whatever challenges they were confronted with. It was about creating spaces for emotional conversations to take place, and where help can be found, and where such a thing is not seen as a weakness. So again, love what you put in there, Verity. So somebody's complaining, Mitesh, that the volume might be problematic. So I'm not sure if it's on the person's side or it's on our side, if there's an issue with volume, and if we can help that person. Another thing on the chat, which maybe I want to talk about, is Anne Baker, who speaks about a program that the CIE is running, which is aimed at developing a positive culture and a climate at school. And I don't know if you are comfortable to leave some contact details so that maybe we can take this conversation forward with you, because we would like to connect in the sandbox with some people who are, also working towards the same goal. And then just maybe to go forward and see who else has said anything on the chat. Again, the idea that that technology is something that we need to contemplate on, is something that's coming up quite strongly in the chat. And the idea that, so let us maybe go to Morita. Morita Shinelight. So it might not be a name, it might be a company. I'm sorry for just using your byline there. So I apologize if it's not your name, Morita, but it might be a company. So Morita's talking about how do we lobby data providers to provide data and to provide access to data so that it's cheap. And countries in Europe and in other places are investing so much in making data freely available for their population. How can we as a continent do the same? And what would be the ways we could go about, providing some of those sites that may not be as data draining, as we have seen, in this country. So how do we make data more readily available so that people and children in particular can have access. There's also a lot of conversation around the MEC's conversation, and you would know that the MEC also, was a proponent of paperless classrooms at one point, and there are some studies being done at the moment to see how those paperless classrooms coped during the pandemic, and these are again our public schools we're talking about. We're not even going into the private school space. So Mitesh, I don't know if you want to just maybe put up that next Mentimeter. We're already at 16:03. I don't want to really delay people, but if you could put up that next Mentimeter exercise, maybe we can see what people have said. So here we go. What are the build back better stuff that we should hold on to? So here we have this idea of change coming up quite a bit. And a lot of 21st century skills being, subscribed to. So curiosity, innovation, collaboration, cooperation. And I like this, whoever's put this down, giving every child a fighting chance to achieve success. And I think that's what the MEC was talking about in terms of the special school idea, where it's not a one size fits all. And then a hybrid form of learning where there are platforms developed so that schools can use them, so schools want to be innovative, but how do we guide them along? And what do we do in order to support them? And then it's adaptability, agility, foresight. Again, lots of the 21st century skills development appearing in the things that we need to build back better, stating that actually the COVID-19 pandemic was a forced opportunity. Again, resilience, coming up as something that's really important, which is picked up from Mr. Teka's, presentation. And again, as a South African population, just generally, I think with all that we've been through as a country and as a nation, resilience and agency is one of those things that have really held us together and something we can be really proud of. But how do we build on it? In fact, tomorrow we have a student who is presenting her work on teacher agency and resilience, and she's using a particularly interesting framework on how this is connected to teacher leadership conversations. So again, resilience, and how do we build that in so that agency, can also be, erupted. Managing change requires critical thinking, reprioritizing quickly when change happens. Again, thinking on your feet. This whole idea of thinking on your feet. How do we prepare people to think on their feet, to respond to whatever's happening in a decisive manner, but also in a consultative manner? And then, somebody has put parental engagement. I was waiting for that one, because I think it's for the first time parents have ever interacted with their children's education during the lockdown than ever before. And for the first time, they were sort of living in their children's classroom while their children were learning. And I think a lot of the literature and a lot of the feedback in the newspapers and in media shows how parental engagement has actually supported the classroom and the teaching and learning project, and how parents have actually been the fulcrum of keeping the learning project going. And so the other idea is that how do we create a community of practice, even with parents, and how do they then contribute to the school, not only in the online space, but in strengthening that collaboration, even further, so that they feel a part of their children's lives. And then somebody is talking about the use of smartphones, the idea of education in your pocket, and how to leverage the various strengths of community involvement, and how to then get various role players into the picture, so that a pedagogy of care can be, unleashed. Somebody says do away with pedagogy, and I'm very intrigued. So really, I wish I could have further conversations with you in terms of what do we replace it with, because this whole idea of, learning loss has been highly debated in the media. Have children actually, by losing curriculum time, does it mean that they haven't learned anything? Or do they learn also from everyday life? And this is a really lively conversation that we need to bring into our spaces. Again, somebody talking about emotional well-being to be addressed at every level, and that, no learner should be left behind. This conversation being ever, so important as we think about the digital divide, and how the digital divide has really, disadvantaged. In fact, in one conversation, one teacher said quite clearly that I want the quality of learning for an online student to be exactly the same as a student that does not have access. So again, the idea of how do we have the same quality of education offline and online. And then again, innovation coming up over and over again on how we need to think differently, how we need to, have an awareness of what it means to learn from a distance, and how this impacts households. Is it that everybody sits around the dinner table having these interesting, learning conversations, or does it become a madhouse with everybody having to, impinge on each other's space as learners try to learn at home? And as you would know, some learners don't have a learning environment at home that is conducive. So what do we do in that particular instance? And then again, pandemic opening up opportunity to be computer literate and to promote capabilities, to embrace the fourth industrial revolution, and so forth, again, coming up. Teamwork, collaboration, creativity, again, all of the 21st century skills development coming up very, very, very strongly. Wow, that's all I can really say. I think we have so much here in terms of conversation that all of you have contributed to, that I'm like so overly impressed with everything that we brought together today, in our engagement. So that just leaves us with really a closure conversation that I hope Professor Pierre du Plessis will take charge of right now. But again, a huge thank you to the audience, a huge thank you to the presenters who have done a sterling job in pulling this conference together and making day one of this conference the success that we find it to be right now. Over to you, Prof. du Plessis.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me? Just a yes or a no?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Maybe just to close this conversation this afternoon. What I've heard this afternoon made me very excited because it was so refreshing robust conversation and inputs from various stakeholders across the broad education field. So starting with the Education Trust, right to Mr. Lesufi, right down to our students, which I'm not going to mention by name this afternoon, but I can tell you one thing, colleagues, what I've heard this afternoon make me very excited for the future of education in South Africa. And I just need to tell you that when I was visiting schools in rural and urban areas, one of the things that principals mentioned to me, which is a concern, is that our learners became academically unfit, and which means that they came from a background that they were in a very, very informal environment and then came back into a formal situation, which actually was to me a very big surprise. But this is things that you as leaders must really work on, and I think some of our teachers as well. And just before I say something about the highlights of this afternoon, colleagues, is that one concern that I have, which I pick up at schools as well, is that COVID is sometimes a hiding place for lazy teachers as well. And I'm going to tell you 1 or 2 sentences on that, because they can blame COVID for a lot of things, but you know what? And they don't have data and things like that. But if you're a good teacher, I've seen all the comments this afternoon. We need to think out of the box. We need to be innovative. We need to be go-getters and things like that. That is the verbs I would like to hear from educators, leaders in South Africa. And what I pick up this afternoon actually made me very, very excited. And before I say then 2 or 3 things what I picked up, which is the focus this afternoon, is that to say thank you to all of you for your presentations this afternoon. I mean, for Kagiso Trust for their input, Dr. Potikvi as the program director, and Professor Yassim for organizing the 1.5-day or the 2-day workshop on the challenges of leaders in very challenging times. I was very fortunate to do 2 or 3 studies myself in rural and in urban schools with the challenges of COVID-19. And what came up is very, very interesting. There's so many things that we can actually have another workshop on that came out this afternoon, which I would like just to highlight quickly. You know, today, exactly 522 days ago, 17 months and 5 days, you've heard the next words, my fellow South Africans. And you can still recall that the voice of our president telling us that we are going to go in hard lockdown for 3 weeks, and then it was extended for another 2 weeks, and 522 days after that, on the 1st of September, we are still sitting in some sort of a lockdown. But within that lockdown, teachers were not locked in. Teachers came up with very, very good ideas to be innovative in the technology world, etc., etc. Although we have a lot of problems with, especially in our rural schools and other schools, colleagues with technology, yes, we hope that we've got the talent, we've got the ability, we've got the go-getters in South African education today that can change what you need to change. And to me, this afternoon, I can't be negative. I always make a negative a positive. And if this is one of the messages I want to put out there to all teachers in South Africa, is to stay positive. Yes, there will be another challenging times coming, maybe another pandemic, who knows? But then we know we've learned a lot out of COVID-19 that we can take forward to make our education system much, much stronger at the end of the day, and then build teachers that can be ready for those challenges. And I think our curriculum challenges will be to prepare our learners for that. So what I'm trying to say this afternoon, colleagues, and I'm just going to say 1 or 2 things, what I've picked up, what stood out for me. And I like what was said about emotional intelligence. For the first time, hands, heart, and your head will come together, because this is where principals, where leaders, and if I talk to leaders, I've talked about classroom leaders, SMT leaders, community leaders, district leaders, etc., across the board, that our head, our hand, and our heart must come together, because for the first time, education needs to actually reach out to communities. Communities must secure that our schools will get back on par as we had it before the COVID-19, and even improve on that. Yes, South Africa's got maybe a challenge, but we can stand up to that challenge. But I'll just pick up this afternoon, colleagues, and this is what I've saw in my research as well. There were a few things that, like financial sustainability, leadership challenges, the technology challenges, the safety of learners in poverty, curriculum challenges, and then a false sense of community that I picked up in one of my studies. But I want to say something about the what I've picked up with leadership challenges. School leadership practice have changed dramatically due to COVID-19, colleagues. Due to the pandemic, school leadership is unlikely to return to normal anytime soon. So suddenly, most of our schools prepare programs that is not in the normal situation where teachers, I can recall a teacher said they went to local pick and pays, local spas and things like that to actually put homework out to learners if they couldn't reach them with the data available. So today, leaders need to distribute responsibilities. Colleagues, you will have different leadership styles in this COVID times and the challenging times that we are talking about. Not meaning that democratic leadership, you will have distributed leadership, you will have servant leadership coming into as well, because leaders in the time of COVID and challenges are actually backing down to be servants to the community, to the school, to their learners, to their teachers, and then obviously then to the community in large. Self-care will become a main priority for many school leaders. School leaders will need to discern with the technology products that are in the market. So colleagues, many of our principals, I always make the joke that we were born before technology. So it was a big challenge for many of our leaders to really adapt to the online challenge of COVID-19. This is what I picked up this afternoon. And it was so nice to hear from students who are into the Sandbox project and working in the Sandbox project, that they are coming up with new ideas, new ways of thinking. This is what we need to do. Then obviously the technology leadership challenges are there. Then the technology challenges will be there. All schools have to rethink and embrace digital technologies in order to create sustainability solutions for both the learners and staff. Schools will move more and more increasingly onto the online environment. If you like it or not, colleagues, we are not out of the woods yet. We are learning that the fourth wave is coming, etc., etc. So that will be challenges that we need to actually look into and prepare ourselves for academic year. Although they said 50%, we've lost 50% of the academic year. I don't think so. But you need to prepare yourself that we might just be on the online mode and space again in 2022. So it will take time for us to get to that new normal that we are hoping for. The transition to the online learning will cost money, unfortunately. And this is where the education department will really need to come on board. And we need to really support our online programs at school. If we need to succeed successfully in education, colleagues, we need to get all our schools on par with the technology challenges. Yes, school leaders, our curriculum will change as well. I'm going to quickly go to curriculum challenges. When our minister said that we need to actually maybe sacrifice the October holidays, I've seen so many teachers jumping up and down and say, this is my holiday, this is my holiday. but she was prepared to give you the 23rd, the 24th, and that weekend off as a sacrifice for the holiday. But it's not on the cards now, colleagues. We need to trim. This is a challenge. We need to trim the CAPS curriculum. It's too full. Especially now when you were actually giving the command from the minister to trim down on the curriculum. That brought out challenges to teachers. They didn't know exactly what was meant by the trimming of the curriculum. Now, however, reality is staring us in the face as many learners are from disadvantaged communities, really with really bad school buildings, dangerous pit toilets, shortage of water, shortage of learning materials and large classes. Colleagues, I just came from not long ago from rural Mpumalanga, where grade 1 class, 62, and then they've got A and B group, 62 the first day, 62 in the next day in a grade 1 class, which is uncalled for. No learning can take place in that crowded classrooms, and we need to look into that as well. Schooling inequality is mirrored in our society. South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and that we need to actually start stamping out. Colleagues, and I can continue. We are really into many challenges. So many principals said, my teachers struggle to adapt to the online system as our school is lacking online resources, and we can continue with that. But I want to say, maybe just close, because I only have a few minutes. Colleagues, I want to plead with you this afternoon. Maybe this is the beginning of a very good conversation, what we started this afternoon. Maybe that must happen more often, more input, so that we can, but this must not stay here. We normally talk at conferences, at workshops, but it's not taking forward. It hangs in the air. There were so many wonderful ideas, input from the floor this afternoon, that we need to take it further, so that our education authorities can see that teachers, leaders, everybody is thinking out of the box. Actually, not out of the box. They threw the box away, so we are moving on. School leaders have a sense of responsibility to support their communities, and this must continue, colleagues. Work with your governing bodies, work with your teachers, motivate them. You know, when was the last time, a few weeks ago, I asked in a group, when was the last time that you received at least an acknowledgement in the past 7 days? Nobody in that crowd put up their hands. Now, colleagues, in time of COVID, motivating your staff, be there for them, know what the emotional situation is with staff. They're coming from a lot of things that we've heard this afternoon, families disrupted by COVID, etc., etc. We can put anxiety, depression, isolation, all that type of things we can actually put onto the cards this afternoon. I can say this, a new chapter is being written about school leadership in disruptive times. In normal times, school leadership operated with well-known parameters with clear patterns, but colleagues, COVID-19 changed all of that. So my plea to you this afternoon, we are on this journey. Leading in disruptive time challenges school leaders to navigate a different course and create new pathways through the COVID-19 disruption. On this journey, colleagues, school leaders are defined by their determination, their hope, their belief that whatever happens, whatever the cost and whatever the scale of the challenge, they will continue to put the best interest of the learners first. Thank you, colleagues. Great stuff this afternoon. I wish you all the best for the second day as well, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pierre. I think I really love the way you ended us and rounded this ending with this new chapter that's being written. And I think this is the beginning of writing that new chapter. This conversation that we're having today is the beginning of writing this new chapter. All of us online at the moment and who've been a part of this conversation today, We really sincerely thank you for your robust participation, and we really hope that you enjoyed the engagement today. We look forward to another power-packed day tomorrow afternoon when we come back into day 2. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful rest of the evening, and we'll catch up with all of you tomorrow. Take care and bye-bye.